Fortnite is the biggest game of the moment, and now it has a much requested Switch release. Developer Epic unleashed it on the eShop right in the middle of E3, giving fans of Nintendo's hybrid console a chance to go up against Xbox One, PC, and even smartphone users. Of course, for now, PlayStation 4 systems are exempt from cross-play with Switch, and Sony's position here is a stubborn one. Not only is it not allowed, but if you've even used your Fortnite account on PS4, you'll need to make an entirely new login to work on Switch. The good news is it links up perfectly with every other platform. Mechanically, it's the same game, and the Unreal Engine core translates neatly to Nintendo's hardware. Visuals and frame rate do take a hit. Inevitably, its Tegra X1 SoC can't match up to the horsepower of Xbox One and PS4. But that's really not the point, given it can be used as a handheld as well. The question is, to what extent does its nips and tucks really matter to the competitive experience? To answer that, I'm drawing in the Xbox One X version as a comparison point. This is key. It shows us Fortnite with practically maxed out visuals, and highlights exactly what's needed to get it running well on Switch. It's also worth pointing out the frame rate is cut from a 60fps target on Xbox One X, with drops even on that console, to a lower, more manageable 30fps ceiling on Switch. More on that later in this analysis, but the point is the goalposts are moved in terms of render time per frame. It means Nintendo's console only needs to focus on pushing out one new frame in a 33.3 millisecond render time, rather than the 16.7 milliseconds needed for 60fps. In other words, this isn't a repeat of Rocket League, another competitive Unreal Engine game that shoots for 60fps on Switch and does a reasonable job of it too. Visuals are cut back heavily to accommodate it there, leaving behind a bare bones looking version with a fluid frame rate. Fortnite takes the opposite path, 30fps, and while there are visual tweaks, it's surprising how good it still looks. Whether it's docked or portable play, this feels like the complete package in many respects. The only real omission feature-wise is the Save the World mode, focused on building and defending bases, and so you're left to a typical 100-player PvP game. So the method of comparing clips here is simple. I take a Switch, jump into the same game as my Xbox One X, and then quickly kill off one of the systems so I can view the other in spectator mode. So if you notice a little bit of network lag between the two, that's why. But this gets us the best, most precise comparison shots possible. The camera focuses on one player, but each system renders the world in an entirely different way. Okay, so what does Switch get? If you have Nintendo's machine docked under your TV, it renders at a native 1600 by 900 resolution. Okay, it can't hold a candle to image quality on Xbox One X running above 1080p at all times here, but given the power constraints, it is respectable. Sadly, that 900p number is actually the maximum pixel count you'll get from the console, and it will dynamically adjust depending on how much action is going on screen. So if you're building lots of structures in the eye of the storm, the resolution drops, with the lowest number I've seen so far being 1296 by 729. Sadly, the fact is it's easy to spot on a character's moving arms while building, and next to Xbox One X, it looks blocky and low resolution. A temporal anti-aliasing pass does help disguise that resolution hit, just like X, but the effects are limited and those jaggies do show up. Switch also suffers from a similar ghosting artifact as a result of using that anti-aliasing technique, a trail that appears when you're panning your gun around, though it's a problem all consoles have. On the plus side, the field of view is an identical match between the two, and Switch actually renders a proper 1080p HUD as well. Looking past resolution, there are plenty of cutbacks in visual settings. The most obvious, well-drawn distances are clearly pruned back on Switch. Grass and shadows only fade in at the close to mid distance on Nintendo's machine, while Xbox One X renders them far into the horizon. It must be stressed though, Epic's absolutely made the right call here. This is purely an aesthetic downgrade, and all the major geometry, trees and players render in properly on Switch, all the way into the background. The crucial building blocks are visible at all times, and while some elements update at a lower frame rate, you're never really at a competitive disadvantage as a result of that. Of course, grass still renders in properly up close, and the core sprite work quality is untouched. Yes, the density of grass is dropped on Switch by a preset, and you do get slightly thicker, fuller pastures on Xbox One X, but the fact is trees and grass animate properly for both systems. It's only by putting these two side by side you'll notice a few tufts are missing, though the pop-in is a more obvious drawback for Switch. The other big pitfall here is texture quality, though surprisingly, Switch offers mostly matching textures to the X version. The big difference really is in how they're presented though, with low-grade trilinear filtering used on Switch, creating clear cascade lines on the ground. At a distance, it turns all textures into mush. It's a soup-like blur, unless you look directly downwards to see the texture map head-on. Only then do you realise most assets on the ground are identical to Xbox One X, so it's really only an issue with the filtering. It's unfortunate for Switch then, but not really a deal breaker to the core gameplay. And the same goes for the other real GPU saving settings, helping Switch hit that 30fps target. Shadow resolution takes a big hit when looking down, and the quality of ambient occlusion, the shade in between objects, isn't as refined on Nintendo's Portable but still acceptable. All taken together, the changes are many, and it's in combination that the downgrade sticks out in a side-by-side comparison. Likewise, it's a shame to see that lighting is missing entirely from underneath exploding grenades. There's just no light bounce at all on objects nearby. And then we have the light shaft or crepuscular ray effect on Xbox One X, which is again disabled on Switch. So it's the superficial stuff, but it is missed. Major Unreal Engine features like screen space reflections are given the chop on Switch too, but that's at least replaced by a convincing enough cube map reflection. It's got nothing on Microsoft's console in terms of accuracy. Buildings, bridges, cliffs and everything in between are accurately mirrored there, but fundamentally it doesn't make a huge difference to how it plays on Switch. And while it is a basic workaround, spots like Loot Lake still look passable outside of comparisons. But all of this supposes you're playing with the Switch under your TV, missing the killer feature of Switch's hybrid design. The good news? Taking it out of the dock, you'll rarely notice a difference in visual feature set, at least not on the smaller screen. Shadows take a further hit in quality, as does ambient occlusion, causing more stippling and noise in the corners of rooms. And again, texture filtering is closer to the player, so you can see filtering lines on the floor more obviously, plus plant draw distances are reined in even more. But let's be fair here, this does involve blowing the image up to match, and it's not representative of how you'll see it in a portable state. Taken on its own merits, the game looks great even with these dialed back settings. Okay, that applies for most things, but there is one part that rankles. Moving from dock to portable, the resolution takes a hit as well. It runs at 1280 by 720 to match the display, but again with dynamic resolution dropping that number below 720p where it needs to. The worst case I've found is exactly 50% on each axis, making it 640 by 360, and yes, it does look rough around the edges at that point. That really is the lowest number on record though, and again, it's all in service of hitting a similar 30fps cap. And hey, whether docked or played portably, the payoff is there in performance, at least in the early prep phase of a battle royale. Just like the smartphone versions, this is a 30fps experience on Switch, and initially at least, it largely holds that number pretty well too. Network hiccups and stutters are the only problem in my experience early on, and flying over the map at the start with all 100 players does flag some issues. It's something all versions suffer from to an extent, but even so, you may get a better experience by wiring your Switch to a router directly, avoiding Wi-Fi altogether. The initial hunt and gather part plays nicely though, for the most part at 30fps. One small problem is that frame pacing isn't correct, and you'll spot the occasional 16ms blip here and there, usually after a frame drop. It's not so much an issue at the start of the game, but once the firefights kick off properly at the map center, expect to see that frame rate line get more and more erratic. Unfortunately, you're looking at 20 to 30fps performance in docked mode when any real action kicks off, and using Switch in portable mode follows the same pattern. Dynamic resolution only keeps the game's frame rate in check to a point. Whole shootouts in complex spots like tilted towers runs at around 25fps constantly. It's kind of expected given all surviving players descend on one point in the map towards the end. But still, it's a shame that these drops kick in at the one time where a smooth frame rate is needed. In its defense, this doesn't happen every time. The location and number of players factor in here. Equally, drops like this are generally harder to spot on Switch's smaller screen when used as a pure handheld. Performance on Xbox One X is sobering by comparison. Sure, even this machine can't manage a perfect lock at 60fps and expect drops to around 50fps when the going gets really tough. In general though, you're getting a largely 60fps experience in the build up to any big shootout, and playing at home, there's no question, X owners have a competitive advantage over Switch. Shooter controls benefit from that sharper response time, and it's an example of Xbox One X's raw GPU power translating to better playing conditions. Even so, the Switch release is far from a write-off. I personally adapted to the 30 FPS cap just fine, and while those drops are a shame, the fact is it's hard to beat as a portable take on Fortnite. As ever, it's really best to see Switch as a powerhouse handheld with the bonus of docked TV play. In the midst of all the versions out there, the visuals here hold up surprisingly well, despite the cutbacks, and the game is still eminently playable. Fortnite's made the jump to so many devices by this point, and Switch adds to the roster with an impressive take. As a handheld experience, there's nothing quite like it. The controls are spot on, and it's surreal to see Switch join a 100-person battle royale with platforms far ahead of it in power spec. It's not a simple proof of concept, this actually works, and forgiving the frame rate drops, it's an enjoyable conversion of one of the year's biggest hits. Anyway, that's all from me today. A bit of a diversion from our E3 coverage, but if you did enjoy it, do let me know with a like or subscribe. Plus, be sure to click the bell to receive notifications of any new videos as they land. Also, to see this video at source file quality, do check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net. And to get in touch with me or the team directly, feel free to comment away on Twitter. But until next time, thanks for watching.